choose into the future. This is all happening, and of course we know that the world that we live in is a complicated place. Has it become less complicated in the last 5 years? No, it has become more complicated. And I just used this picture symbolizing trade here. The pressure points have increased. So we're going through this once in 100 years transformation towards zero emission, towards a digital vehicle, a digital enterprise, in an environment that sometimes feels like a Category 5 hurricane. So if there is a time now to stand back and do an inventory of the situation and maybe take a more pragmatic and a more sensible approach, now is that time. Otherwise, we're not going to decide our destiny. Others are going to decide our destiny for us. The Chinese were mentioned, and it's true. The biggest exporting nation nowadays for auto is China. It is a European good tradition. I represent a German car company. It's always been kind of a badge of honor to be an export champion, and we are still strong on exports. But the Chinese have taken over this position now. Why is that? Well, one reason is competitiveness. You can talk about many things that they have done in their ecosystem to build an ecosystem to become competitive, but it is competitiveness. And if we want to meet this competitiveness, the first thing we need to do is to work on our own competitiveness. Clearly, you can and should have an argument about the level playing field in an imperfect world as part of a wider, not always perfect WTO trade framework. The discussion about level playing field is of course legitimate, but the solution, if you're challenged, is not to try to build a wall. The solution is primarily to improve your own competitiveness. That's where the focus should be. And this is also where the focus should be for Europe in terms of its market. Before COVID, we sold, I don't know, 3 or so million more cars than we sell today. Why? Why is the European markets getting smaller? And why do we risk making it even smaller than that? China is back and above 2019 levels, and the United States is back as well. So obviously there's something in our growth policies or our approach to economic growth that is not working as well as the two other major economic regions. When the Draghi report came out 1 year ago, I took the time to read it, not because I suffer from insomnia or anything like that. It was very interesting reading indeed. And actually the report that had been written by Letta, I think half a year before that, had many of the aspects of it as well. And I was thinking to myself, this goes far beyond the auto industry. There's a capital markets union and so many things. I was thinking to myself, why don't we just do that? It was ordered by the Commission. There were some inconvenient truths in the report. There was clear recipes how to deal with many things. Many things that are in the report I know are politically difficult to achieve. But in essence, it was an honest assessment of where Europe stands and what you need to do. I have to say I was a little bit discouraged when I read now 1 year later, Mr. Draghi had been asked to make an assessment. How far have we come now after 12 months? And it was not particularly positive reading. And what I think we need to do in this case of looking at European competitiveness is we need to significantly increase the sense of urgency. I believe a lot of people are talking about it, but how much are we doing? And for the auto industry, these next weeks here leading up to Christmas and maybe into the new year will be absolutely crucial if policy making can be put on the right path. I think Antonio said, we need a big change. We don't need a small change, we need a big change. I couldn't agree more. That electrification is going to be a heterogeneous picture. I'm preaching to the choir. Everybody that works in the auto industry knows this. Mercedes-Benz is active in more than 150 markets around the world. So if we talk about technological flexibility or technology openness or market-driven approach, which is what we need, every global company is going to have to, for the foreseeable future, 10, 15 years, whatever it's going to take, 20, have to deal with all the technologies anyway. So in that context, it doesn't make sense if one economic region just decides to close its mind towards what's happening anyway in the world. We have to be on the same page, away from an absolutistic target with draconian penalties on one stakeholder alone, to a market-driven approach, massive investment in the enabling factors, infrastructure to make electrification successful, which is the main road. But at the same time using incentivization, nudging, and let the market forces use its power to drive us towards what we at ACEA believe is going to be a better path to green, a more successful path to green. Worst case, and this is a picture from Havana, worst case, what happens is what also Antonio said. If the TCO is not right, or there is another reason for the consumer, maybe lack of charging infrastructure, a little known fact, of the 27 EU countries, about 6 or 7 have come quite a long way in terms of building a public charging infrastructure. France, pretty good. Yeah, Germany, not bad, a few of them. But almost 20 countries are at the very beginning of this journey. And in 9 years' time, we're going to tell consumers you have only one choice. What the consumer does then, if that choice is not appealing to the consumer, is to hold on to what he or she already has. That would be the worst case. It would make the market collapse. It would be bad for decarbonization because the car park gets older, 250, 60 million vehicles. That's where most of the CO2 footprint sits anyway. And for the many thousands of suppliers that are part of this European automotive ecosystem, many of those are small, mid-sized companies, many of those are family-owned. If you have a market collapse and it takes a few years to get back to an equilibrium, the area under the curve that is lost in terms of economic size would wipe out many of those companies. That is why in this debate that we have, CLEPA, which represents the suppliers, and ACEA, which represents the manufacturers, and we don't always agree on all things. In this case, we stand shoulder by shoulder. And they, maybe even louder than we, say we need to change. What about our own value chains? Yes, we need to work on those. We worked on them for 140 years in the previous paradigm. We need to work on them again. There are different things that need to be talked about here as well. Sometimes not discussed debate. I was asked about Nexperia and I was asked about the rare earths. If you look into the value chain of batteries, from mine to refining, to then the cell, to the system, to the car, in the refining, for 6, 7, or 8 of the major ingredients that you need for a battery, pretty much all of the refining capacity is sitting in Asia, and of that, most of it is sitting in China. I'm not aware of any European initiative in the last 5 or 6 years to build refining capacity. I'm not aware of anything being planned at the moment, to be totally honest. So in 9 years' time, we will have not just the rare earth, 5 or 6 or 7 of more of those, if we stay on the current regulatory path. It's a political decision to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. My point is, if you know you're doing this, the minimum thing you should do is to talk to the partner that you're going to be dependent on. That would be my advice. And should you want to have a nascent European battery cell industry, as opposed to one where Asian players industrialize in Europe, which is fully okay from my perspective, but if you want to have a nascent European one and you want that to survive, then you're going to have to be prepared to not just spend money on CapEx, but on OpEx as well. Otherwise, for economies of scale reasons, you're never going to get to the stage, probably where you're competitive against the ones that started that journey 15 or 20 years ago. So what to do? Many things have been said. I'm kind of repeating now. Switch method to a technology flexible, open, market-driven approach with investments into infrastructure to make electrification successful, and use incentivization and nudging and not absolutistic targets and draconian penalties as a method to get this right. I focus mostly now on the CO2 thing, but I think it was also said before, and I like the analogy that François used. As a European auto industry, it feels like you're turning up to the World Championship finals in a 100-meter sprint. You have these other competitors right and left from yourself. And you're looking in your lane, and in your lane there are hurdles. And in the other lanes, it's like a free path. And you're starting to think to myself, how am I going to win this race if I have to jump the hurdles and the others can run a free path? It's more than just a CO2 thing. It's the whole thing. Why are there not inexpensive small European cars anymore? I mean, the European car industry are the masters, I'm here in France now, masters of making attractive small cars. Why are they not so affordable anymore? Well, one of the reasons is regulation. So we have to go after the whole thing, not just talk about CO2, which is the main thing. And also a point that was made, there are 3 swim lanes: passenger cars, light commercial vehicles, and heavy-duty vehicles. Because the market dynamics of how these markets operate and how the customers make decisions are different. Another flaw of the many flaws in the Green Deal is that they have kind of bundled LCV and passenger car more or less together. That is not going to work. It's a TCO-driven business, and it's not going to work. We have to decouple those and have one path for cars, one for LCV, and of course, today already, one for heavy-duty vehicles. We as ACEA, the manufacturers on this, stand together. We're speaking with one voice. Yes, in a happy family you can have arguments as well, no question. But the common denominator in terms of where the debate sits has never been bigger, and the common denominator between the suppliers and the OEMs has never been bigger. And we look forward to having this dialogue with the EU Commission. But it's not about tinkering around the edges, making a few adjustments here and there, and then hope everything's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine. We have to make big changes to the regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ola. Maybe you can join me. Thank you for this very interesting presentation of where we are with the European automotive market and European automotive industry. So what do we do now? I mean, we'll meet with Stéphane Séjourné later on this afternoon. You said that we can't run the race without the same advantages or rules than the others, and you're right. So what do you ask for today? I mean, is it a changing of the European path to decarbonation? Do we have to change the 2035 goal, or do we have to adapt it? What would be your request?
So I would start that conversation by saying, what are we going to do as an industry first, and then what do we request from the policymakers? What we are doing is we are investing in terms of deploying capital into research and development, etc., at the highest level in the history of the European auto industry. As I said, putting your money where your mouth is. I think we're filing also as a joint industry between suppliers and manufacturers. We're filing more patents than ever. We're creating hundreds of attractive choices now in all classes for electrification, full electric vehicles, different types of hybrid. So we are signing up to doing our part of the deal. That is something that the policymaker can rely on. But what do they need to do? they need to prevent the market from becoming smaller. So in essence, yes, we have to open up 2035 and make it technology flexible. The main road is electrification. Let's not make any mistake there. But you cannot dictate to the consumer in a market economy exactly what he or she wants. So you have to open up and allow hybrid variants. There is a discussion about fuel. Can you blend in? Can you blend in as a compensation non-fossil parts of the fuel? I mean, in one calculation, and ACEA, we're talking also to our partners in the fuel industry. If you would be able to blend in 5% more non-carbon items in the fuel on a car park that is 250 million vehicles, the CO2 reduction of that is equal to 100% of new registrations, zero emissions. So you see how powerful the car park is. And as I had on my slide, and it was mentioned also by Antonio, we have to make sure that we have separate swim lanes. With regard to LCV, or heavy-duty vehicle for that matter, it's not a 2035 problem. It's a 2030 problem. The current targets for 2030, for any sensible person is 4 years away. It just looks like it's not going to fly. And if we don't make adjustments now, we might be a little bit too late.
So the first step will be 26, 30, 35. For 2030, it's mainly for the professional cars and professional truck, or is it the mix you have to reach by 2030?
The way I would do it is, so that we don't just piecemeal it, is I would look at the 2035 regulation as the current major milestone, come to a conclusion and agreement there of what the flexible scenario would look like, and then I would work backwards. So if you change 35, by definition, you have to tackle 2030. There are no two ways about it. If you want to throw in an angle of supporting Europe, supporting European industrialization, and this conversation is ongoing, it's not concluded, but it's ongoing. Can we incentivize, and I deliberately use the word incentivize as opposed to the word mandate that is often loved in Brussels, incentivize more European content to give manufacturers and suppliers like a bonus for that towards your decarbonization goal, blending those two things with each other, possibly. But it has to be a market-driven approach. You will not be able to force the customer to do something that he or she doesn't want to do. So nudging, incentivization, and clearly more investment in infrastructure as well, so that all 27 countries, we need, if we want to electrify and ultimately be zero emission, from, I don't know, Kiruna in the north of Sweden to Lecce in the south of Italy, from Bucharest to Bilbao, the whole European geography needs to have a decent infrastructure for this to work.
You just mentioned the European content, local content. How does this have to be implemented, and does it have to be mixed with the with tariff and with commercial war, or is it something completely different?
My advice would be handle with care. If it's done wrong, all you would do is to drive inflation and reduce competitiveness. And maybe short term, you give yourself some type of a relief, but long term, you will lose out and you will not be competitive. I don't think there is a simple answer to that question. That is something that requires very careful analysis.
You're not talking about tariff, but about local content.
Yeah, I'm talking about local content now, but any type of market distortion, whatever method you use, the crudest method you can use is just to raise a wall and put up a tariff. That is the crudest market distortion. But any other version of market distortion has to be carefully thought through to make sure that I was kind of advocating, let's make more affordable vehicles. If you add that element in the wrong way, it's just going to drive the price up even further. So it's something to handle with care.
It's interesting because maybe there's some, not disagreement, but different point of view about local content in the industry. Carlos Tavares last week in Les Echos said that if we do that, we will have more expensive cars and Chinese shareholders. We will have both. So it's what you think too?
When the founding fathers of our company invented the automobile back in 1886, and the world was moving at a different pace at that time, it didn't take long for Gottlieb Daimler as an entrepreneur to say, German market is interesting, but the world is a big place. So in 1898, and I think this is remarkable, we set up shop in the United States. So if we expect any entrepreneur from anywhere in the world to restrict their mind about where they're going to do business, I think we are grossly mistaken. So we have seen this with Japanese, Koreans, Americans coming again with Tesla and so on. I think in general we should strive for open and free markets, but make sure that the playing field is as level as possible. We're not living in a perfect world. If another football team is playing with the 12th man on the pitch, you need to address that. But I don't think it is in the interest of Europe, as traditionally an export champion type of economic region. We should not be the drivers of protectionism. We should try to uphold the free trade world as best as we can in this complicated world that we live in.
So you will say, of course, the same thing for tariff, which is maybe we will gain a little bit time, but we won't be as competitive as we should be if we do that.
Work on our own policies to not make ourselves less competitive, which I feel in the last 10 or 15 years, most of the regulation, if I just look at the impact on my company, has it increased my revenues or lowered my cost? No, it's been the other way around. So turn that tide, please, and go in the other direction. Most of the competitiveness work is the job of the company itself, for sure. And we have a global footprint, so we can take advantages of operations around the world, and we do. But for Europe as an economic region, focus on strengthening the competitiveness first, and in terms of trade policy, handle with care. Level playing field, yes. Pure protectionism, I would say no.
You speak about competitivity of the European industry. How do you explain the difficulties we have on the Chinese market, especially the German constructor? It's very difficult tough. What is your analysis of the situation?
Two things are happening in the Chinese market that we observe. We had a period for the longest time, I don't know, 15, almost 20 years, where it felt like cruise control. No matter what happens, China was always growing. And even if economies were having difficulties around the world, you could always rely on China. It's clear that in the last 2 to 3 years coming out of COVID, that the size and the maturity of the Chinese economy is at a place now where they have their own structural issues. So their growth machine has not been the same, certainly not for us, in the last 2 to 3 years. And you can see that the consumer sentiment has been subdued. So you have a tougher environment, not that Klondike style, it just goes up and up in the last 2 to 3 years. Adding to that, you have well over 100 players vying for a market that maybe can support 30, maybe 40. How long will it take to sort that out? Not overnight. That is why we're experiencing this unbelievable competitive intensity between the Chinese themselves, but between the Chinese and every other international company. And that squeezes that market a lot. There you have to decide as a market participant, how much of that do I take part in and how much of that don't I do? Because I just don't want to burn cash to protect market share. That's up to every company to decide. But one thing that I think needs to be made clear, the Chinese auto market, by a wide margin, is the biggest auto market in the world, almost as big alone as Europe and US put together. So it needs to be a place that if you want to be competitive on a global scale, where you need to be, and then take on that competition.
But are you sure they play with the same rules? Are you okay with the level of public aid, notably in R&D? I mean, if you want to be able to compete, you have to play with the same rules.
if you listen to what the Chinese say themselves, and even what the central government is saying, and there is this term, Neijuan, involution, where the central government says, it seems like it's kind of gone too far. We're going into a more harmful level of competition. And I think it's true to say that during those golden years, every province wanted to have their own car company. And a lot of entrepreneurs, to be fair, said, I can do this. And maybe they established too many players. To back out of that and sort that out is not an easy task. If you see what's happening on the ground now in terms of provinces being able to subsidize car companies or not, it is incredibly much more difficult for them to do that than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. So I think it's been recognized, they have said it themselves, but they're trying to, in their way, step by step, see if they can sort it out. But my prediction is the next years are going to be very, very intense in the Chinese market.
What about the American market? Or do you deal with the new regulation, with tariff, with the local content rules also?
So in the case of Mercedes-Benz, us being either one of the biggest or maybe the biggest industrial exporters from Europe to the United States, being an export champion was a badge of honor for decades. In this difficult environment, it's more challenging. First, I would say I'm very, very happy that we have strong operations in the United States, both on the passenger car side and on the LCV side with our operations there. So we're looking at strengthening them, no question. Paying 15% as opposed to 2.5% is different, as you can see in our public disclosures around our quarterly reports. But the US market and the US economy as a whole, $30 trillion economy, with a lot of policies, and it's not mentioned a lot in European press, by the way, that if you look at what the US is doing, we talk about the tariffs all day long because it affects us. But if we look at what the US is doing to deregulate their own market, back to the European playbook that needs to change, they're actually making a lot of decisions that makes it more interesting to invest in the US. I think that's going to drive economic growth in the next 5 to 10 years. Do we want to play a part in that? Yes. So even if we now short term have pain here, I definitely see for our company the US as a growth market, and we will invest more in the United States. And as I said, we've been there for well over 100 years.
You talk about the consolidation of the Chinese market with the 100 of brands existing there. What about the European group? And do you think there is still room for consolidation in our market, in the play field of big European brand like yours?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the European industry has so many strengths. It's not just the innovation strength and the engineering depth and all those things that we have. We also have very strong brands. And if you look at the fabric of the European market specifically, and I think the greatest gift with the EU was to create a common market, but you still have in terms of consumer preference and some national regulation, which I think, by the way, should be harmonized. So the European project is not finished. It's work in progress. You still see that each market has its own flavor. So the French car market is not exactly the same as the German, as the Spanish, or my home country, Swedish. So you have to know your customer. You have to make sure that you have the right footprint in every market. This is one of the reasons, by the way, where it's often more difficult to break into the European market as a player that have not been there before. Since you have to almost have 27 game plans, one master plan, but 27 game plans. And I think we mastered that quite well. But the key is this: great product at affordable prices. And the affordable prices piece of it is partly down to regulation, and that's why this dialogue with Brussels is so important.
Well, we have a big agenda on the regulation this afternoon. We first the French Minister of Economy, Roland Lescure. We know that France was apparently reluctant to support the German-Italian initiative about 2030, 2035, about flexibility and neutrality of technology toward the, of course, decarbonation goal. should I say to him later on, to Roland Lescure, to convince him to be, I mean, to accept this idea of flexibility and adapting the European agenda?
I'm an optimist by nature, so when I read the headlines and I started reading what has been said, I'm going to try to read between the lines. My view is, but I would be interested to hear it directly then ultimately from the policymaker, is that France did not say no to flexibility, but that France said flexibility needs to come with some kind of a European agenda attached to it. That is how I read it. And what I would say is, for the grand nation to be even grander, the first step needs to be promote economic growth. And the current policy making risks doing the opposite, and that cannot be in the interest of France, which is one of the key players, absolute key players, not just in Europe, in the world, for the future of the automotive industry. So many jobs, so many high-quality jobs in R&D. Why jeopardize that when there is a better, smarter path to green?
As you probably saw in France, the Parliament debate about budget doesn't go in that way, in this way, doesn't go in this path of growth and competitivity.
I heard very clearly what Antonio said, and I think what François said. They're speaking to the unions, and ultimately, of course, the interest of the unions is jobs. And isn't it remarkable that the unions more or less have the same opinion that industry leaders? I speak to the leading German union, IG Metall, which represent most of all the workers in the auto industry quite often. And IG Metall and VDA, so the equivalent to PFA, even came out a few weeks ago with a joint statement. I cannot remember when the union and an industry association have written a joint statement. Maybe that's something that needs to be written in France as well. Maybe I've already done it. I don't know. So again, many political goals that you try to achieve, it all starts with funding, right? If you don't bake the cake, you cannot achieve any of the other political goals either. So I think it all comes back to that one point. And that's the clear message to the politicians. Let's make ourselves stronger. Let's not make ourselves smaller.
It's interesting because I saw last week in Germany the rising of the minimum wage, like 30%, I think. How does that impact your industry? And can you explain why Germany has taken this path?
You can be for or against minimum wage. That's a political debate that could keep us busy for the rest of the day. In the immediate auto cluster with the OEMs and the big suppliers right next to it, of course, we're sitting above those levels. Once you get into logistics providers and so on, that's when you get into that region. So I have understanding for the fact that you should be able to live on your salary. Of course, I have understanding for that. But it is like with any economic equilibrium, make sure that the amplitudes of regulation does not distort the system too much.
Maybe the last question about the, we will also host Stéphane Séjourné later on. Same question on for Lescure. What should we obtain from him before he leaves the room?
So one question I have to him, I've already asked it, and I think they are contemplating this. I want to pick up on one point. I'm just taking one single item here. If we want to have a nascent European, as in a European battery cell industry originated out of Europe, not just one that is in partnership with the Asians, which is fully okay from my point of view. If you want that nascent European battery cell industry to survive, what's called the startup valley of death to get to scale, I don't believe that at this point in the game, where others that are scaled, you can do that without both support on the capex side, but also on the opex side, which the Chinese did for a while. Maybe they don't do it anymore, but they did it for a while. If we don't do that, we're probably going to have to accept that the European cell industry is in Europe, but it's Asian.
So we are at that point now?
I think we are at that point now.
Oh, okay. And what level of subsidies do you need on operation?
So I didn't want to take him now virtually to the Turkish bazaar, but it is a double-digit euro per kilowatt hour type of size that we're talking about.
And what about regulation? What about the different steps? Because we know we are waiting for the European proposal at the end of the year.
If I want to throw in a bonus, at the International Auto Show in Munich a couple of months ago, I met with Robin Seng. He's the founder of CATL, which now is the biggest cell producer in the world. We work together with them, and they have industrialized in Europe, and we're encouraging them to industrialize more. So what did Robin ask me that I should ask the European politicians? He said, I understand that the wages are higher in Europe, a little bit lower, of course, in Eastern Europe, higher in Western Europe, but I understand that the wages are higher. I accept that. I understand that energy costs, not everywhere, but energy costs on average are higher. I accept that. But what I cannot accept is if I try to build a state-of-the-art gigafactory in Europe with a construction code and the regulation around equipment, etc., it is factors higher, just the capital intensity of doing it in Europe than in China. He said, can you not ask for just give me a zone, give me a geographical zone inside Europe where I can build a piece of China in Europe? And if you have been to one of these, to take away any prejudices here, if you have been into one of these gigafactories that he has built in China, you see the most modern kind of hospital operating theater type of cleanliness factories. And I'm thinking to myself, why should it be so unbelievably expensive to just build? Is that regulation, back to regulation, is that regulation, is it really in the interest of the consumer, the citizen, the environment, etc., or is it misguided? That was his only ask. Let me give me a free zone for construction, I'll accept everything else. That would be my bonus question then.
Maybe last question, we want to dream about the future of the industry. What is in your lab at Mercedes for the car of the next 10 or 15 years?
So as dynamic and as pressure cooker as the industry is right now, and I've been now 33 years with Mercedes, this is at the same time the most exciting time to work in the auto industry, because technologically I have not experienced a period where more is happening. So it's the best of times for the engineers, and it's the best of times for the consumers, to be quite honest. And if I look into the future, we will have cleaner, safer, smarter, more convenient, in case of Mercedes, also kind of a welcome home feeling when you step into the car of mobility. So we have, in these tough times, embarked on the biggest investment spree ever, and we will have the biggest number of product launches in the next 3 years compared to any other time in our history. So that piece of it couldn't be better. Now we just need to get the environment to become a little bit better too.
We have to survive.
We have to survive. We have to survive.
Thank you very much, Ola. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci à vous. Merci à tous. On va faire une petite pause. Je vous rappelle qu'on a un grand programme cet après-midi. À la fois, on va parler évidemment de technologie, de start-up, du mondial de l'auto aussi. Et puis, n'oubliez pas qu'on reçoit le ministre de l'économie. On a beaucoup de questions à lui poser. Et le vice-président de la commission, le commissaire Stéphane Séjourné. À tout à l'heure.
they run.